General Hospital spoilers teaser. For years, Sasha had been the embodiment of resilience in the face of relentless adversity, a symbol of defiant hope against the punishing winds of fate that constantly swept through the turbulent landscape of Port Charles. Her journey, a haunting tale of endurance and pain, was marked by betrayals, addiction, loss, and manipulation at the hands of those she once trusted. She had survived being poisoned by enemies, exploited by family, crushed by the death of her newborn child, and betrayed by those who were supposed to protect her. Her marriage had crumbled under the weight of tragedy, and her autonomy had been ripped away when she was forcibly institutionalized, falsely diagnosed, and chemically incapacitated in a plot so cruel it defied comprehension. Even when she clawed her way out of the mental health facility with Cody's help, determined to reclaim a life that was hers to live, Sasha still had to watch as the shadows of her past clung to her like a second skin. But lately, there had been a stillness, a fragile kind of peace that Sasha had learned to cherish in quiet moments. She found solace in the kitchen of the courtroom estate, where the rhythmic clatter of pots and pans drowned out the ghosts of her past. She cooked not just meals, but memories, creating a sanctuary out of routine, one breath at a time. With the news of her pregnancy, hope had once again dared to whisper in her ear, reminding her that joy might still be possible. She was cautious, never quite letting herself believe, but still allowing a sliver of light to reach her heart. And then, as fate would cruelly have it, everything unraveled in an instant. During a high-stakes custody hearing where she had been called to testify on behalf of Michael in his battle with Willow, Sasha stood tall on the witness stand, unaware that her body was on the verge of betrayal. The courtroom was tense, the air heavy with anticipation, when Sasha suddenly clutched her abdomen. The pain was sharp, unnatural, and immediate. Cold sweat streamed down her face, her breath came in ragged gasps, and a low, involuntary moan escaped her lips. Her hands trembled violently, and before anyone could react, her knees buckled. In a blur of chaos and fear, she collapsed in front of a stunned audience. It was Michael who caught her, his instincts faster than his thoughts. Cradling her frail body against his chest, he called out for help as her eyes fluttered open and closed, barely conscious. In that moment, something in Michael shattered. He had watched Sasha suffer before, had stood by as she battled demons both real and imagined, but this was different. The timing, the sudden onset, the severity, it was all too perfect, too calculated. This wasn't nature's cruel joke. This was sabotage. At the hospital, the doctors confirmed what Michael already feared. Sasha was in premature labor, dangerously early, and her life, as well as the baby's, hung by a thread. As monitors beeped and machines whirred around her pale form, Michael held her hand, feeling the clammy cold of her skin and the weakening rhythm of her pulse. Rage and sorrow surged through him in equal measure. How much more was she expected to endure? How many times could one woman be torn apart before she was finally allowed peace? He remembered Liam's death, the silence of the hospital room after the monitors stopped, the hollow ache of grief that never really went away. He remembered Brando's murder, how he had died trying to protect Sasha, only to leave her alone and vulnerable. He remembered Gladys, the woman who should have been Sasha's guardian angel but instead became her Judas, draining her bank account and selling her sanity for chips at Selena Wu's underground poker games. He remembered the doctor who drugged her into psychosis, the reporters who stalked her for headlines, the friends who vanished when the lights dimmed. And through it all, Sasha endured, picking up each shattered piece and willing herself to keep breathing. But now, someone had dared to strike her again, and this time, Michael would not let it go unpunished. He began to dig. With surgical precision, Michael combed through every detail of the courtroom that day. Who had access to Sasha? Who had handled her water, her food, her surroundings? He reviewed surveillance footage, consulted with private security, and leaned on connections both legitimate and otherwise. Subtle anomalies emerged, too many to be coincidence. Sasha's water bottle had been replaced moments before her testimony. A janitor with no employee record had entered the courthouse that morning. Her medical records had been accessed remotely the night before, triggering no alerts because the hacker used credentials belonging to a recently dismissed hospital staffer. The deeper he went, the more tangled the web became. This wasn't just about Sasha. Michael began to suspect a larger agenda, one aimed at undermining him during the custody trial. By destabilizing Sasha, they aimed to discredit the emotional cornerstone of his case, portraying him as reckless, surrounded by volatility. But why now? Who had so much to gain from sabotaging Sasha and stripping Michael of his rights as a father? The answer, when it came, chilled him. The same forces that once tried to control Sasha through guardianship and medication now seemed to be operating in silence again, cloaked in legality and manipulation. The money trail led to an anonymous trust with shell companies linked to old adversaries. Some names surprised him. Others didn't. Port Charles had always been a battlefield of inheritance, vendettas, and carefully curated alliances, and Michael had long believed himself above that war. Not anymore. Now, his fury had a purpose. He wasn't just fighting for custody. He was fighting for Sasha's dignity, for her chance at motherhood, for the future of a child who had already been thrust into the center of a ruthless game before even taking a breath. No more waiting for justice to arrive in neat packages handed down from the bench. Michael would wield justice himself. In the sterile quiet of the hospital room, Michael sat at Sasha's bedside, watching the slight rise and fall of her chest beneath the blankets. Machines hissed and beeped, nurses whispered in hushed tones, and outside, a storm gathered over Port Charles. He whispered promises to the child they hadn't yet named, vowing that they would be born into a world where their mother's story wouldn't end in tragedy. He promised Sasha that when she woke, she would be safe, free of the monsters that had chased her for so long. And most of all, he promised himself that when the truth was finally brought to light, Port Charles would tremble beneath the weight of its consequences. The battle had only just begun. But this time, Michael wasn't just defending what was his. He was avenging what never should have been taken in the first place. Michael was no longer the man he had once been, not after that night. Something inside him had shifted permanently, as if the final remnants of innocence and complacency had been scorched away by the sight of Sasha crumpled on that courtroom floor, writhing in pain, eyes fluttering, fighting for breath while everyone else stood frozen in horror. The man who once hesitated in the face of difficult truths, who once allowed doubt and fear to dictate his decisions, had vanished. In his place stood someone reborn through fire. Hardened by loss, sharpened by injustice, and fueled by a rage that burned colder and deeper than anything he had ever known. This was not simply about love anymore. This was about retribution. Every night, Michael returned to the sterile confines of the hospital room that had become both his battlefield and sanctuary. He sat beside Sasha's fragile body, wrapped in a tangle of tubes and blinking monitors, his fingers entwined with hers, listening intently to the slow, mechanical rhythm of the heart monitor. Sometimes, she stirred, a soft moan escaping her lips, a flicker of pain across her brow, and he would lean in, whispering promises into the hush of the night. He spoke not just to her, but to the life growing inside her, the child they had prayed for, one he swore would not suffer the same fate as Liam. He told them stories of strength, of survival, of a future where the shadow of grief would no longer loom. He vowed that Sasha would not fall again, not while he still had breath in his body. In the daylight, Michael became a man possessed, relentless in pursuit of the truth. He interrogated doctors with quiet determination, combed over Sasha's medical charts, and demanded a full toxicology report. He spoke with the courthouse guards, pressured the bailiffs, and even tracked down the technicians who operated the video and audio equipment during the hearing. Slowly, a pattern began to form. Sasha's medical records had been accessed remotely just 48 hours before her collapse, by someone using a hospital credential that had been deactivated 2 weeks earlier. A subtle breach, easily overlooked by routine IT scans, but not by Michael. Then came the blood test. The presence of a synthetic compound in Sasha's bloodstream, one not normally associated with any prenatal treatment, raised immediate alarm. The compound, designed to mimic the natural hormone oxytocin, could induce premature labor when introduced in high enough doses. Its trace levels coincided exactly with the time frame in which Sasha consumed a bottle of water handed to her minutes before her testimony by a courthouse staffer Michael had never seen before. and whose name appeared nowhere on the employee registry. It was the breakthrough he needed. What once seemed like a cruel twist of fate had now been exposed for what it truly was, a calculated act of sabotage. Sasha had been targeted, her unborn child used as leverage in a larger scheme whose ultimate goal remained hidden in shadow. Michael saw the pattern clearly now. How the collapse of Sasha on the stand would not only discredit her as a reliable witness but would also weaken his legal case for custody. It was too precise, too insidious to be anything but deliberate. This wasn't about Sasha anymore. This was about control, power, and legacy. And someone had decided that the best way to weaken Michael was to break the woman he loved. Piecing it together was like following a blood trail through a storm. There were whispers. Faint connections to people long thought disappeared. And among them emerged a name Michael had hoped never to hear again, the shadowy figure once implicated in Brando's death, a man who had evaded prosecution by slipping through the cracks, vanishing just as the investigation closed in. Now, it appeared he had resurfaced under a new alias, tied to shell companies connected to Sasha's past modeling contracts and old financial holdings. Assets that had been quietly restructured just days before the courtroom incident. It was more than coincidence. It was orchestration. Realizing he couldn't do this alone, Michael began forging unlikely alliances. He reached out to Cody, the man who had once rescued Sasha from Ferncliff, knowing he still harbored a deep loyalty to her. He consulted Sam, whose experience in tracking down elusive figures through layers of digital deception made her an invaluable asset. And most surprisingly of all, he approached Anna, a woman whose past straddled both justice and espionage. She listened without interruption, her face unreadable, then nodded slowly, her interest piqued by the scope and implications of what Michael was uncovering. Together, this informal coalition began the task of dismantling the machinery behind Sasha's collapse. They followed financial transactions, traced digital footprints, and investigated the security gaps that allowed an unregistered staffer to approach Sasha on the day of her testimony. They uncovered evidence of someone manipulating courthouse security protocols, rerouting surveillance feeds, and erasing visitor logs. Every discovery confirmed what Michael already knew in his gut: this was no isolated incident. It was the latest move in a dangerous game being played behind the scenes of Port Charles. As the investigation deepened, Michael's resolve hardened into something immovable. This was no longer about winning a custody case or protecting his reputation. It was about vengeance, for Sasha, for Liam, for every time justice had failed them both. Michael didn't want sympathy or forgiveness. He wanted results. And he wouldn't rest until the one responsible was stripped of their anonymity, dragged into the light, and forced to answer for what they had done. Back in the hospital room, Sasha remained unconscious, caught between worlds. But Michael never left her side. He memorized the cadence of every beep, monitored every fluctuation in her vitals, and spoke to her as if she could hear him. He told her of their child's heartbeat, strong and steady. He described the nursery he had begun preparing, the crib he planned to build, the lullabies he would sing when the world finally left them in peace. He reminded her that she was more than the pain she had suffered, more than the scars she bore. She was his anchor, his fight, his fire. And he would burn the world down before letting it extinguish her spirit. Port Charles had long been a place of shifting alliances, where secrets were currency and betrayal could arrive wrapped in the smile of a friend. But now, it faced a man with nothing left to lose. A man reborn not through forgiveness, but through fury. Michael was coming, and this time, the reckoning would not be delayed. Beneath the gentle, unceasing drizzle that fell like whispered grief across the darkened streets of Port Charles, Michael stepped out of General Hospital and into the cold night air, no longer the man he had once been. The rain soaked through his jacket and clung to his skin, but he didn't flinch. He didn't even blink. His eyes, once softened by love and dimmed by hesitation, now burned with a new intensity, an icy determination that could not be shaken. There was nothing gentle about the man who now stood at the threshold of the hospital's glowing entrance, only a sharpened edge formed in the crucible of tragedy, betrayal, and fear. He was not mourning. He was preparing for war. He walked with silent purpose through the parking lot, the soft thud of his footsteps muffled by the rain-slicked asphalt, but every movement radiated the simmering energy of a man transformed. The echoes of beeping machines and Sasha's shallow breath still lingered in his ears, but they were no longer haunting, they were motivating. Every beep of the monitor had become a war drum in his mind, every drop of rain a reminder of the tears Sasha had shed in silence over the years, tears no one else had seen. She had been beaten, broken, discarded, and blamed. And still she had survived. But this time, someone had tried to extinguish that fragile flame entirely. They had targeted her in the most cowardly way possible, through her unborn child, through her love, through her hope. And Michael would never forgive them for it. He no longer viewed the justice system as his refuge. Not after watching Sasha collapse in the courtroom with no one there to prevent it. Not after the revelation that her condition had been deliberately triggered. Michael had seen the paperwork, spoken to the doctors, reviewed the video footage, and connected the dots. Someone had drugged her, discreetly, intentionally, and with full knowledge of what it would do to her. They had sought to turn Sasha's suffering into a weapon against him, to dismantle his credibility in court, and to destroy what little light remained in their shared future. Whoever they were, they had crossed a line that could never be uncrossed. And Michael, once patient and forgiving, had found a new role to play, executioner of truth, avenger of the wounded. He thought of Sasha lying pale and motionless under the fluorescent lights of the ICU, surrounded by tubes and machines, fighting a battle she didn't even know had begun. He thought of the baby, a tiny, fragile soul clinging to life in an incubator, surrounded by clear plastic walls that could not protect them from the darkness that had already tried to consume their family. This child, not even born, had already been marked by a world that thrived on cruelty. And Michael could no longer bear the thought of standing by while the ones he loved were hunted by ghosts with names he had yet to uncover. So he would become the storm. He would no longer wait for affidavits, hearings, or court orders. He would take matters into his own hands, starting with those subtle, invisible threads of conspiracy that wove through Port Charles like poison in a water supply. He would find the person who poisoned Sasha. He would find the person who accessed her medical records under false credentials. He would find the one who coordinated the courtroom breach, who made sure that a stranger could place a single poisoned bottle of water into Sasha's hands without question. Every shadow, every whisper, every forged signature and hidden bank transfer, he would hunt them all down. Because this wasn't just a crime. This was a violation of everything sacred. Sasha had been treated like a chess piece in someone's ruthless game, and their child was collateral damage. But Michael wasn't a pawn. Not anymore. He had nothing left to prove and nothing left to lose, except Sasha, and he refused to lose her again. Under the flickering yellow glow of the hospital street lamp, Michael's silhouette looked almost spectral, as though he had stepped out of a dream and into something ancient and primal. The kind of man who could no longer be reasoned with. The kind of man who didn't need to make threats, because his very presence whispered of inevitable consequences. Somewhere deep inside him, the old Michael, the one who had once believed in order and compromise, was gone. What remained was someone entirely new, forged by agony, refined by clarity, and driven by purpose so sharp it could slice through steel. And this purpose was not vengeance in the traditional sense. It was about preservation. Preservation of what little good still existed in their lives. Preservation of the sanctity of Sasha's resilience, the innocence of their unborn child, and the memory of everything they had lost, Liam, Brando, and the years wasted in trauma. Michael would not allow those memories to become tombstones. He would use them as fuel. In the days that followed, Michael would begin to build a quiet network. He would call in debts long left unpaid, awaken allies who had faded into the shadows, and reopen files that the police had long considered cold. Cody, Sam, and Anna would become his first circle, operatives in an underground pursuit of justice that would not play by the rules. Together, they would root out the corruption, the lies, and the rot hiding behind polished veneers and legal briefs. And when they found the one responsible, the person who had looked at Sasha and seen only a target, they would bring them to their knees. The war had begun, but it would not be fought in public. It would unfold in late-night meetings, encrypted messages, and strategic moves across a town that had learned too well how to conceal its sins. But Michael would not be deterred. His strength no longer came from hope. It came from resolve. A resolve that could not be shaken by fear, or bribed by convenience, or dulled by time. And when it was over, when the truth was laid bare, when Sasha could once again breathe without dread, when their child could grow up in a world not built on silence and shadows, then, and only then, would Michael rest. Until that day came, poor Charles would learn what it meant to stand against a man with nothing left to fear. And the rain would keep falling, soft, steady,